Gotcha.
Hello everyone, and welcome to my combat guide for fighting the fanged beast, Rajang. Before we move on to talking about combat tips, I want to go ahead and explain how you unlock Rajang. He is an endgame activity. You need to finish the story and reach Master Rank 24 or higher, and then you're going to speak with the Admiral. He's going to give you a few special assignments. When you're done with those special assignments, Rajang is going to be unlocked in the Guiding Lands. Rajang came with his own armor set and a slew of 14 fresh weapons. You might be interested in the heavy bow gun or maybe the level 6 wide shelling gun lance. All of his weapons look terrific, so you might just be using them just because you like the way they look. If you were hoping to fully upgrade the Rajang weapons, you're going to have to fight a tempered Rajang in the volcanic region at level 7. Maybe you can find somebody who already has it at level 7 and they're willing to help you out. Otherwise, you're going to be doing some grinding in the Guiding Lands. Alright, now that we're done talking about how to unlock Rajang, let's talk about some strategies, let's talk about some combat tips that's going to make your fights easier and faster and more likely to be successful against this guy. Because, you might be fighting him in a really nice investigation, but maybe your team can only feint once. Maybe your team can only feint twice, and you don't want to waste those and cause a loss on that investigation. Let's go ahead and get started. Tip number 1, a really important topic when you're fighting Rajang is to talk about the changing hit zones on Rajang, okay? So fighting Rajang means picking the right part of his body to attack at the right time. When you look at the hunter notes, his head is always a 3-star weak spot, but it's not really giving you the full story. So one of the things in the game that you can't do is you can't use Clutch Claw on the head. This means you can't soften the head. Since you can't soften the head, Weakness Exploit only ever gives you a 30% bonus of affinity on Rajang's head. Now, if you have a weapon that has 70% affinity, that's not a problem. But most of the time, you're not going to have that. So a much better target is to focus on his forearms when he's not charged up. He has multiple charge states. He has the state where he's a gray color and he's fully charged down. Okay, he's uncharged. Then he has the next stage up where his fur turns yellow, but he's not fully charged yet. And then finally, he has his full charge, right? This is where his arms have kind of a red glow. He's roared and blown you all away, and he's using his really powerful attacks. Well, when he's completely charged down, you mostly want to focus on his forearms. And what you want to do with the forearms is break those forearms, because what happens is when he's in his final charged up state and his arms are red, if they're not broken, your weapons are going to be deflected by them, and they're not going to take any damage at all. The trick to getting around that is to go ahead and break the arms, right? And you can do that when he's not charged up. You can soften the arms, you can deal a lot of damage to the arms, and then they actually break pretty quickly. So I recommend focusing on the arms when he's not powered up. When he starts getting powered up, this is when you want to change focus on the tail. So the tail is a really interesting part of the fight, because even though it's this little scrappy thing, it's actually counting as his own hitbox, right? You have the hind legs, and those don't take too much damage. But then you have the tail, and the tail actually does take good damage. Particularly, when we're talking about shot damage, the legs don't actually take good shot damage at all. You're not going to get Weakness Exploit to proc on the hind legs. You will get Weakness Exploit to proc on the tail. The tail's going to take a ton of damage, and if you can break the tail, he will fall out of his charged state sooner. So when Rajang becomes charged up, you're going to change target from his arms to his tail, and you're going to try and break that tail to get him out of the charged state, but also because you're going to get a lot of damage on that tail while he's in the charged state. Tip number 2 is going to be nice and short. We're just going to talk about the elemental weaknesses and the ailment in the hunter notes. Notice that he has a 3-star weakness to ice. He pretty much resists everything else. He won't take any damage from fire, thunder, or dragon. He takes like 1-star dragon from water. That doesn't matter. So go for ice weapons if you're going to be using an elemental damage build. When it comes to ailments, he gets a 2-star weakness to blast, which means you could be using blast weapons. I don't think they're particularly important. I don't know, maybe Azor or Magdaros weapons. But yeah, poison, sleep, paralysis, and stun as well. You have to notice that as well. Stun's not too crazy. So with Rajang, you could use a blunt weapon like a hammer, but you're never going to have a soft part on his head. So again, you're never getting that Weakness Exploit to proc at 50%. And he's pretty resistant to stun, KO damage as well. So hammers and hunting horns, certainly you can use them, but this probably isn't going to be their best fight. You know what I mean? Okay, so mostly we've been talking about strategy. We've been talking about the moving hit zones. We've been talking about the elemental damage, his resistance to, ailment damage. Let's move on to talking a little bit about the actual combat. Tip number 3. One of the things that I noticed about Rajang, one of the changes from GU to a Monster Hunter World Iceborne, is that he really doesn't have the melee range that he used to have, right? He's got a number of melee attacks, and a few of them actually do have good range, like when he dashes forward or when he spins forward real fast. But, when he's using his other melee attacks, you pretty much have to be hugging him in order for these to land, and these attacks generally don't protect his backside very well. Also, when he's firing like his Thunder Beam, he's actually very vulnerable during that beam period for a good amount of time. Not to mention, it's very easy to tell when he's getting ready to fire this beam. So one of the interesting things about Rajang is that his melee attacks are generally short range, and then he has one elemental attack with that Thunder Beam that's highly punishable. Okay, so in general, when I'm fighting him, those are the things I'm noticing the most. And then he has niche moves or niche things about him that stick out. We're going to talk about that next. Tip number 4, one of Rajang's strengths is how fast he moves, which can make it hard to land attacks on him if you're using a slower weapon, like maybe a greatsword. He's also a pretty small target, so how fast he moves and how small he is kind of goes together. Even with the bowgun, like let's say you're using normal ammo, this dude moves so fast, you basically only get good shots on him when he's been incapacitated somehow, right? So he moves fast, he has a small body, and he generally just attacks all the time. He's attack after attack after. I've noticed that about a lot of Iceborne monsters, by the way. Coming from the base game, the attack rate on the monsters has definitely gone up, and I think that's kind of like Capcom's way of saying, all right, here you go, you've got a difficult monster. So this guy, he's pretty hard to land an attack on, and what you really have to do is memorize which moves are most punishable, and how do I punish each of those attacks. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle to get damage in on him. Tip number 4, if you're right in front of Rajang, you're in the danger zone, because most of Rajang's attacks actually come out in a straight line in front of him. He uses ramming attacks, he uses his multiple wild punches, he just kind of goes in a straight line on that. A full body spinning attack with almost no wind up, you're going to get hit by that eventually. I get hit by that one all the time. He's got the beam, which we already mentioned. He even has this jumping attack where he grabs you, right? So he'll leap forward. He always leaps forward for that one. He turns towards you. So you kind of always know what direction his moves are going. Sticking to Rajang's butt and to his sides is always safer. Tip number 5, we need to talk about Rajang's strongest attack. His strongest attack comes when he's reached the final stage of charge up. We talked about this earlier. We said he has 3 stages. The 3rd stage, he does a big crazy roar where he knocks everyone away, his arms turn red, and now he's going to start using his kind of like his ult or supernova, whatever you want to call it. We should all agree on what we should all start to agree on what the name of the move that's most strong for a monster should be called. Maybe we just call it the ult. So he's going to have this clear windup where he looks like he's roaring, but he's really not using a roar. He's going to like take both of his arms. He's going to be like fisted on his side, like he's really angry. And what he's going to do after he's used that short little windup, he's going to jump right up into the air and belly flop right on top of a single target. This move has enough damage to one-shot quite a few builds, especially if you were missing a little bit of health and you have no, Divine Blessing or anything like that on, or maybe you're not running with health boost. That's going to be a one-shot. The move also has a bit of a radius too, as well as the fact that Rajang's picking a target and he's tracking that target. So he picks somebody, he's going to jump on you. If your weapon's already sheathed when he chooses you, and he's choosing you because he's looking at you, right? He's facing toward you. If you're already sheathed, you can kind of just outrun the move, but it's always safer, of course, to dive evade. If you have a guard weapon, you can guard it. You probably need guard up. I haven't tested if you have to have guard up for this move. I would bet you do, because it appears to have a thunder element to it, and usually when you see these elemental attacks, these supernova style attacks, they're the moves that do require guard up. So you probably have to have guard up to guard it. You can iframe through it. I've iframed, rolled through it. It's very tricky to do that, and if you miss that iframe, you're going to get punished hard. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's probably going to be a one-shot. You should also be careful to know who he's chosen. If you misinterpret who the target is, like he's actually targeting your buddy, you run to the side, you could unwittingly be running into the attack. Moving right along, one of the most important tips for fighting Rajang is to simply carry flash pods in your item loadout. Flash pods. You want to keep these active, actually equipped in your slinger pretty much all the time if you don't have something else equipped. So, if you're going to run them into a wall, maybe you got crystal burst, maybe you have bomb pods, fine. But if you don't have those, run the flash pause. And this is because Rajang likes to grab players. And he has this kind of funny grab where he throws you into the wall. He does a little dance as he's getting close to you, and he's going to punch you, right? And that punch is going to be for a bunch of damage. It's not as bad as his one-shotting, belly flop, but this grab does enough damage that if you were missing a chunk of your health, you could be one shot on that grab. If you were missing half your health, you're almost definitely one shot by the grab, okay? So with the grab, let me mention this. When you get knocked against the wall, if you're wiggling your joystick fast enough, a lot of people have a misconception about this. When you started playing the base game, it teaches you when you're knocked down to wiggle your joystick, and this helps you stand up. It's actually true. Some people don't believe that it helps, but it actually does. So move your joystick back and forth so that you stand up sooner. You can actually iframe through that attack if you roll through it, okay? So you can roll through the punch. But again, the smart thing to do would be to have your flash pods on all the time, except for when you're trying to flint shot him into a wall. And if you're flint shotting him into a wall, it's better to have Crystal Burst. There's usually, if you're on a stage with Crystal Burst, grab that. Scatter Nuts are better. Something that can interrupt him, because if he throws you against the wall, you can flash him, you can Scatter Nut him, you can Crystal Burst him, and this will also protect you from being punched, right, from the finishing blow of that grab. Now, tip number 7 is also about Rajang's grab, but this time we're going to be talking about the Clutch Claw too. So Rajang's grab can sort of just pop up, like RNG as one of the attacks he decides to use. But he's also going to be using it pretty liberally if you try to jump onto his arms to try and soften his arms. So if you grab onto his booty cheeks, you can always safely soften the booty cheeks. But if you grab the arms, you have a very high risk of him grabbing you off of his arm and using that grab attack, all right? The one where he throws you against the wall, does his little Ricardo dance, and then punches you. So always be ready to defend yourself if you're going in for an arm soften. That's another important tip. You got to keep it in your mind. Okay, I'm going to grab him on the arm. I'm going to have pods ready for if he actually grabs me. And I have to say, even if you don't intend to jump on his arms and soften up his arms, because I don't know, maybe you're the guy using the light bowgun and you don't care about wounded parts, even if that's the case, you could have flash pods ready just in case somebody else gets grabbed and maybe they didn't bring flash pods because they're a casual. And so what you're going to do is you're going to save them. After they get thrown into the wall, you're going to be like, don't worry about it, buddy, I'll flash them for you. And this is very similar to how you treated the fight against Ancient Leshen. When you go in to fight Rajang, just kind of think of him like the Ancient Leshen. Put your flash pods on, your Scatter Nuts, your Crystal Burst, whatever. Get ready to save your teammate when they get grabbed. On another note, with Ancient Leshen, you weren't able to save yourself because he would grab you and you were disabled from using your own flash pods. This is not true with Rajang. You can actually save yourself, right? And this is interesting because what I've noticed, when he uses his grab attack, he's actually in this really, really long animation. He like holds you in his hands like he's babying you. He's Godzilla, he's King Kong, he's holding you like you're the beauty, and he throws you against the wall and he does his dance. Well, if you allow him to go through all of those moves and then flash him at the very last second, and your team does nothing but wail on him, they get a ton of damage on King Kong, right, on Rajang. So what you could actually think about doing, and this is something I'll be experimenting with myself, get on his arms and intentionally get grabbed. And you're doing this so that your team basically gets that whole animation as a punish on Rajang. It's not a bad trade if you think about it. He stands still, you don't do any damage, but all three of your teammates are doing max damage, and then you just flash him and get out of it. So I think that's actually going to be a move that you can abuse pretty heavily just because you get to control whether or not he lets go of you at the end of the grab. You never have to rely on a teammate to save you. Tip number 7, use your Temporal Mantle and your Rocksteady Mantle sparingly in this fight. Use it to get weakened parts, softened parts on his hide, because one of the things I noticed is, unlike other monsters, you're highly likely to be knocked off of Rajang while you're trying to soften his parts, especially his arms. His arms are insanely hard to grab without being knocked off or being grabbed. And also his tail, especially when he starts to get charged up, that's when you're most interested in attacking the tail. So you grab him by the booty, well, he's got a lot of moves that will actually throw you off and deal a fair chunk of damage. And what you can find yourself doing is grabbing his butt over and over again, getting knocked off over and over again with unsuccessfully like softening his butt, right? So personally, I feel like what you can do, and this is what I do, is I wait for my teammates' mantles to run out, and then I start to use mine. So at the beginning of the fight, I just play without the mantles. Once my teammates' mantles are mostly worn out, I start using mine. He becomes enraged, he becomes charged up, and then I go in for the softening, the clutch claw attacks. This is very useful for my team because they didn't think to do that. And the Rocksteady Mantle, the Temporal Mantle, these are giving me guaranteed clutch claw attacks. Tip number 9 is going to be all about traps. Rajang doesn't like traps. He likes to destroy them. So here's the rule. When Rajang is not charged up, he's uncharged, you need to use a shock trap on him. And when Rajang is charged, you need to use a pitfall trap on him. Okay, so it kind of flips between those two. I don't know if there's any difference between the two when he's asleep. Somebody in the comment section can let me know. Maybe you can use both on them when he's asleep. But when he's awake and running around, if he's charged up, don't use the shock trap. If he's uncharged, don't use the pitfall trap. Okay, so we're mostly done with the tips. I thought we'd talk a little bit about defensive skills against Rajang. Honestly, there's nothing that truly stands out against him, except for maybe like tremor resist, that can be useful. I would say Rajang doesn't use his thunder damage attacks often enough to justify bringing thunder resist. I don't usually find KO to be a big of an issue either, probably because he's carding you before he actually stuns you. So yeah, it's kind of hard to decide what you'd like to bring in order to make the fight easier, mostly just more damage. And honestly, for tremor resist, explosive damage builds that use artillery 5 are going to have an advantage because you can pick up artillery secret from the Zor Magdaros set, and the Zor Magdaros set is also coming with 3 levels of tremor resist anyways, so that was something I noticed, and that's, you know, it's convenient, I would say. If you're using some sort of explosive damage build, you can do this on the charge blade as well. Otherwise, you really only need health boost, in my opinion, so that you don't get one shot. If you're looking for some extra, you know, like raw damage defense, probably Divine Blessing would be a good idea. There's Divine Blessing Secret, which is really powerful. There's also Tool Specialist Secret, which you could use in order to get your Rocksteady Mantle and your Temporal Mantle back faster, or maybe you're going to be running 2 other mantles like Evasion Mantle, maybe like Glider Mantle, mantles that you can keep them active for a while and have the extra decoration slots for something like Agitator. It's up to you, but yeah, I would say Health Boost is really the only main defense I would consider for this build, and everything else is just extra, right? Nothing's like super efficient against this guy. And that's the end of my Rajang combat guide. Feel free to share some tips in the comment section. I'm going to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.